for coming out to join us for the Vandyke Carter Club. This is our very first actual event that's sponsored by our club. We launched about 8 months ago now. It was back in September of last year. And so right now we have roughly 15 to 20 members on and off. We have 4 club officers who have been doing a lot of amazing work, including setting this up, including our club president, Carla, who helped get us connected with Dr. Cynthia Stanley, who's here with us tonight. So give Dr. Stanley a round of applause. Thank you very much. So Dr. Stanley, she teaches at University of Arizona Medical School, and for the past 4 years, she's been also doing art director work with the University of Arizona with medical students, and so she can talk more about what she does with her student class. And for me, my background, before I went to med school, I was a musician, artist. I would do a little bit of poetry, albeit bad poetry. I feel like when you do art, you should at least try, even if it's bad. I feel the same way about music too. You know, learn an instrument, even if it just does nothing more than annoy your neighbors. And then I went to med school, and while I was in med school, I had a pretty rude awakening on my very first exam. Did not do very good. I'm not going to tell you what my grade was, but it wasn't good. And so I was thinking to myself, oh my God, I need to change things up a little bit. And I was studying the same way I studied as an undergrad, which, I print out my PowerPoint slides, take notes in the margins, and that just did not cut it whatsoever. And so I basically had to turn med school into art school. And if you come to my office, I can show you all of my medical school notes. I have a pile about this thick. They're all 8.5 by 11 sheets that I fold in half, turned into little booklets. And I had a stack of booklets for every single module. There's notes I had on musculoskeletal system, on GI, on renal, on neuro, etc., pharmacology. And I just basically would sit there day in and day out and just draw. That's how I studied during my first 2 years of medical school. And so while in med school, I made a couple friends who were also artists and musicians. And there was one friend of mine in particular who was a fine artist who studied in Italy. And he was amazing. I fancy myself decent at art, but he's like stunningly amazing, like sculpture, painting, all sorts of incredible media. And so him and I formed an art club while in medical school, and we would go to the cadaver lab and just draw the cadavers, and it was mostly art for art's sake. When we would draw in the cadaver lab, it was kind of a way to get away from the rigor of medical school curriculum. Right, just a way to blow off steam. That's kind of what I think about when I play music, when I do anything like that. It's just a way for me to blow off steam. I'm not trying to be a rock star anymore. Those days have since passed. But when it comes to art, I feel like it's a way to kind of get yourself out of your day-to-day struggles. Even during, what was it? I think it was our last session, or the session before last, because we meet in the lab here every other Thursday. And I think it was a month ago. I was really not feeling well, just kind of under the weather, stressed out, and not even wanting to go into the lab to do the art club. But then literally just after 30 to 45 minutes of sitting there just drawing, it's like anxiolytic. It's like taking a benzo or something. Right? It's like popping a Xanax. That's just how it feels. It's just like, it just gets you out of that place of stress and discomfort, right? And I'm sure some of you guys have heard about flow state and things like that, right? It's kind of like when you go into a zone, it just lets you just get away from all of your day-to-day problems. So that's kind of the benefit I feel that art provides to basically everyone, right? And then on top of that, if you do something really cool with it, other people can enjoy your work, right? So art, I think, fundamentally begins with more selfish motivations for you to just kind of express your own, pain, your own emotions, your own joy. But then if it's really, really something people can connect with, other people can appreciate that as well. So it has basically two benefits to it. It's benefit to yourself and also benefit to others out there in the world. So really cool stuff. So today I want to talk to you about the brief history of art and its relationship with medicine and science. Some of the history is extremely dark, and that's just kind of how medicine is in general. The history of medicine is pretty dark in many ways, especially when it comes to studying anatomy. This is where we get grave robbers, right? Going in after a person was buried, they would literally go in and, dig up the body and sell those bodies to med schools, and so med students can dissect and learn about human anatomy. So this happened up until the recent past, up until the early 19th century. There were people stealing bodies to sell to medical schools. But that practice dates back several hundreds of years. Since the Catholic Church kind of took hold of power in Europe throughout the early to mid, like the 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, during the Renaissance period, the Catholic Church was kind of like the dominant presence in Europe. The Church strictly prohibited dissection of human beings. And so people who were studying medicine, studying anatomy, would literally have to kind of do this under the radar. And so they would often have to steal the bodies. And so the history is pretty interesting. It's very dark. And it hasn't changed much. Modern medicine is it's improved in many ways, but there's still things going on right now to this day that are morally questionable. Right? I'm not going to go into any sort of medical ethics here, but there's things that we're going to look at in like 50 to 60 years. We're going to look back on some of the practices today and think, that was kind of messed up. Even in the recent past, think about like lobotomies. The guy who created the lobotomy won a Nobel Prize, which is wild, right? We look back on that with horror, and it's like, why? How could that guy win a Nobel Prize? It was abused. Husbands would take their wives to get lobotomized if their wives were acting up. This is true. This is real. John F. Kennedy's sister was lobotomized because she was acting kind of crazy, even though she was probably perfectly normal. Right? So it's interesting. So the artistic aspect of all that is also very interesting. So I'm going to talk about some. This is very brief, right? The actual art in medicine is vast, so I don't have much time to talk too much about it in very much detail, but I'm just going to cover some of the highlights, including this book on the fabric of the human body in 7 books. This is one of the major medical textbooks that was used for a very long time after it was written in the 1500s. So I'll show you some more information about this Dr. Vesalius in a little bit. So very, very interesting figure. Hippocrates is arguably one of the leading figures of ancient medicine. Right? He's the man who came up with, for example, the Hippocratic Oath. Every single physician and medical practitioner takes the Hippocratic Oath, which is first do no harm. Do we all abide by the Hippocratic Oath? Not always. Right? There's some people who do some questionable things, but for the most part, this is what we're supposed to be following. Take a pledge to follow the Hippocratic Oath and not harm our patients. Another thing that Hippocrates was famous for was developing the concept of the 4 humors. Way back in the day, before our modern understanding of the way anatomy works, is that they thought that there were these 4 humors or fluids, body fluids, that if we're thrown out of balance would result in illness. And so those humors included things like blood, bile, black bile, and phlegm. So we look back on that and think it's kind of silly, right? Things have definitely evolved since then. But regardless, it was kind of one of the leading conceptual frameworks that guided medical practice in those days. And this is BC, right? This is before Christ. This is in ancient Greece. So Hippocrates states, wherever the art of medicine is loved, there is also a love of humanity. Right? So Hippocrates, arguably humanitarian of sorts, right? Good man. And then, moving forward in the years, you have multiple different types of artworks that were based on anatomy that were even influenced by Christianity. Right? So, for example, this work that's portraying a flayed man holding his skin is reminiscent of Saint Bartholomew. Saint Bartholomew, one of Jesus' 12 disciples, met arguably one of the worst ends you could possibly imagine. He was flayed alive because of his commitment to the Christian faith. So pretty wild. All of the disciples, with the exception of, I believe, John, met some horrendous ends. Right? Peter, crucified upside down. I think Luke was beheaded, if I remember correctly. But St. Bartholomew, I think, got one of the worst treatments of all of them. And he inspired a lot of art. And I'm going to show you some of the works that you see in Body Worlds. And Body Worlds has also an exhibition of exactly that. But it's a real body, right? It's a real plastinized body, and he's holding his skin, right? All inspired by classic theology, classic literature. Ancient Alexandria. Ancient Alexandria was a phenomenal place. This is out in the Middle East, and this was kind of the epicenter of intellectual curiosity, learning, teaching. Right? This is where all of the brilliant minds of the time would go to share their knowledge with others. And you guys probably are familiar with the Library of Alexandria, which unfortunately burned down, and so we lost a lot of that information that was pertinent at the time. So this is a really cool illustration that depicts what anatomists used to basically do. They would often take prisoners or people who were just recently executed, and they would take them off to dissect and learn how the body works. And the dark part of this is sometimes these people would still be alive. Right? It wasn't uncommon for people to do live vivisections on individuals. So, interesting, but also extremely dark. So that's a really beautiful illustration showing exactly that. And then this is still in ancient Greece, right? This is before Christ, several hundred years BCE. You have a couple of really famous physicians of the time. So you got Herophilus. So this is also a few hundred years before Christ. He's considered the father of anatomy. He is also the one to have discovered or hypothesized that the brain was the organ that actually controlled the body. Back in those days, people would think that the heart would actually control the rest of the body. But it wasn't until the discoveries made by Herophilus that it was thought that the brain was the actual control center. And then you have Erastus, hard time pronouncing some of these names, but he also worked with Herophilus. He made another discovery that was kind of interesting. He discovered that the heart had 4 chambers, and because of that, his hypothesis was that the heart actually was a pump. And these guys are basically heralded as some of the greatest doctors of the time. They also did produce artwork that were based off of their anatomical dissections. However, with the burning of the Library of Alexandria, all of their work was lost. But still they made a huge impact on modern medicine. And here's an important thing. They did receive a lot of harsh criticism because of their unethical practice of performing live vivisections on prisoners. Right? So again, very, very dark history. Now we're going to fast forward quite a bit. And we're skipping several centuries here. We went from BC to now the Renaissance era. And the Renaissance era takes place between 14th to 17th century in Europe, specifically based out of Florence, Italy. Florence was kind of like the epicenter of the Renaissance period. So you had Michelangelo, you had Leonardo da Vinci, and you also had these beautiful painters like Rembrandt, for example. So this is the anatomy lesson by Rembrandt, who's one of the most phenomenal artists of the Renaissance period. If you ever get a chance to visit Florence, Italy, I highly recommend doing so. You're going to find lots of works of Rembrandt amongst other incredibly famous artists of that period. Here's another really beautiful painting. This one's by Adrian Becker. And this is also depicting how some of these dissections used to take place at that time. And then you have Leonardo da Vinci. And Leonardo da Vinci is arguably one of the greatest artists of all time. He was a polymath, so he was an inventor, he was a scientist, he was an artist, painter. He would make his paintbrushes by cutting locks of his own hair, right? Just incredible work. And he came up with the Vitruvian Man, right? So this is now getting closer to our modern day concept of the anatomical position. Right? That's going to be portrayed here by the Vitruvian Man, and the symmetry and proportionality is all just like absolutely beautiful and perfect. And you also have Michelangelo. Michelangelo was one of the most famous artists at that time and studied anatomy, quite intensely. Right? All of his works are intricate and very detailed when it comes to the way that they're portraying anatomical figure. And so this is the creation of man in the Sistine Chapel, right, where Adam is coming in contact with God. So these are all just beautiful works. These are some of the works of Leonardo da Vinci, and he took lots of meticulous notes on just human anatomy, right? Just the structures of bones, the structures of musculature, right, and how all those things interact, right? This is like looking at human anatomy so he can excel at his other works of art. Right? But human anatomy is foundational. Right? This is at the crux of all of his work. And then here's that book that was at the opening, so on the fabric of the human body in 7 books, or the Humani Corporis Fabrica Libri 7. So 7 books, all human anatomy, and it was created by this Dr. Andreas Vesalius, and this is also during the Renaissance period. And he's also considered to be one of the leading figures of modern anatomy and the study of the human body. He was also professor, University of Padua, and he was also the imperial physician under Emperor Charles V. So this is a guy who was working at the upper echelons of society. And this is also during the Renaissance period, where you have the Catholic Church basically saying, you're not allowed to be dissecting human bodies. Like, this is strictly prohibited. But all these doctors and physicians that were studying anatomy were still doing it, but under the radar, right? Against the request of the Catholic Church. But this book that he put together became one of the most important medical textbooks of that time. Really, really cool. And currently, there's a copy at Brown University, at their library, that's actually bound in human leather, like human skin. So really, really fascinating. Now, fast forward a couple of years later, so you got Johannes Schultz, but oftentimes these doctors at the time, they would Latinize their names. So his last name, Latinized, was Scultetus, so Johannes Scultetus. This is a 17th century surgeon based out of Germany. And he is one of the leading pioneers of modern surgical techniques, some of which are actually still used to this day. And this book is really fascinating, Surgical Armamentarium or Armamentarium Surgicum. And I have a copy of this book sitting over there on the counter if you want to thumb through it. You're going to have a hard time reading it because it's all written in Latin. And I speak Portuguese, I speak a little bit of Spanish, I speak a little bit of French, and I've learned, a lot of Latin in med school, so I can read about maybe 15% of it, 20% of it, and understand it. But for the most part, it's kind of tough to read unless you're a Latin aficionado. This book was actually published and completed by his son, and his son also shared the same name, Johannes Schultz. And it was actually not painted by Schultz, but it was engraved by Jonas Arnold, who was a painter and engraver of that time. And this book, of course, was used by surgeons for many years after it was written. Some of the techniques that were in there included like how to perform mastectomies, how to remove kidney stones or nephrolithiasis, like lots of really interesting illustrations and depictions. And you also see a lot of different illustrations of surgical tools that we use at the time. Now, looking at some of these tools, this is the 1700s or 17th century. You imagine this probably wasn't a very pleasant experience for a lot of people, right? Anesthetic techniques were not that great back then. They would use sometimes alcohol. They would sometimes use opium. right? But for the most part, their anesthesia was not like we have it nowadays. So you look at some of these techniques that are depicted in the book, and they kind of look like medieval torture techniques, to be honest with you. I didn't put like a lot of the kind of inappropriate images here, but like here's one example over here. They're trying to remove a kidney stone out of the urethra, and yeah, I can imagine that not being a very pleasant experience back in the 17th century. So, moving forward, so towards the latter, this is beyond the Renaissance now. You're getting into 17th up to 19th century Europe, and now we're moving away from just illustrations, and now we're starting to work with models, right? Now, the problem with dissecting a human being, of course, is that you're dealing with rot. Right? Back then, they didn't have formaldehyde or formalin or anything that we have nowadays to preserve specimens. And so, to be able to deal with that problem, wax carvings were being commonly used to teach medical students human anatomy. And there's several of these wax museums. There's one in Florence, Italy. I've been to Florence. I was there back in 2012, and I went there specifically for this museum, La Specola. So this is the natural museum of Natural History Museum, and they have an amazing room that's all dedicated to these wax anatomical dissections. They have a bunch of other things too. They got amazing taxidermy of elephants and rhinoceros and things like that. But there's a whole entire room that's just dedicated to human anatomy. So La Specola is one of the main ones. There's other ones too. Semmelweis Museum. Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis is the fellow who basically told the entire medical community, hey, you should probably wash your hands before you go in and perform a surgical procedure on a patient or deliver a child or whatever, right? So he kind of came up with the whole idea of preventing iatrogenic transmission of nosocomial infections. There's other museums too that have these really beautiful wax statues and wax carvings, all dating back from the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. These are photographs that I took at La Specola. Just absolutely gorgeous. It's absolutely beautiful. And side note, I was basically the only person there. And so I'm like the only person there in this room just filled with all these like dead people. It's kind of creepy. Here's some more images. Right? It's absolutely gorgeous. This is back in 2011. Look at the detail in it. It's really amazing. All the arteries, the veins, the nervous system. It's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. These models have actually been used by Stanford Medical School. They digitized these models from La Specola. They turned them into like 3D renderings so that the medical students could actually learn human anatomy based on these 17th century carvings. That's how incredible they are. Right? So they withstood the test of time. So they weren't just kind of like Mickey Mouse, statues. These were like actual serious depictions of medical anatomy. And then you get into the 19th century, and this is why we named our club the Henry Vandyke Carter Club. So who, besides our club members, has ever heard of Henry Vandyke Carter? Because I talked to you guys about it in class, right? Okay. Anyone who's like not my student who's ever heard about Henry Vandyke Carter? Who's heard about Grey's Anatomy? Like everybody. Well, mostly because of the TV show, right? But Grey's Anatomy, for the past 150 years, has been like the medical textbook. As a matter of fact, I have a copy of Grey's Anatomy from 1971 over there that was gifted to me by one of my colleagues. While he was in graduate school back in the 1970s, he had to order a copy of Grey's Anatomy from England and get it shipped here to the United States so he could study human anatomy and physiology. And so I have his copy of the book. Now, the reason why we named our club the Henry Vandyke Carter Club is because Vandyke Carter was the artist of the book, Grey's Anatomy. Unfortunately, he got thrown under the bus. Dr. Gray basically got all of the accolades, got all the credit for the work, and unfortunately, Dr. Vandyke Carter did not. Not sure exactly what was going on between the two. This is a first edition copy. Actually, this is like the publisher's copy. When you're getting a copy of a brand new book, the publishers will send it to you so you can like go through it and see if there's anything you want to change. So So this is the copy that Dr. Gray got. He literally scratched out Henry Vandyke Carter's name and said, make his name smaller. Like, so petty. Like, they had some serious beef. I don't know what it was, but there was some serious beef amongst both of them. They're both surgeons. They're both physicians. But arguably, I would say that Vandyke Carter was the more talented of the two. I think this was jealousy. Simply put, I think it's jealousy. That's the reason why he did not give him any credit. As a matter of fact, if you look at the new copies of Gray's Anatomy, there is nowhere that mentions Henry Vandyke Carter's name, anywhere, even though he was the very first medical illustrator of the textbook. They show all the previous contributors to the book from previous editions. They just don't show him, which is very strange. So I felt like, give credit where credit's due. Henry Vandyke Carter, I think, one of the main reasons why this book was so famous, aside from it being so meticulous in describing human anatomy, is that the illustrations were beautiful, just absolutely gorgeous. Like, his work was so gorgeous. There's a video that goes to this, but I'm not going to play it in the interest of time because I want you guys to listen to what Dr. Stanley has to say, so I'll try to keep this short. But in reality, there were two lead authors of this book. It wasn't just Dr. Gray. Those are more of his works. Some of his work is extremely famous. And then you get into the modern era. So this is now in the 20th century, and now you have Dr. Frank Netter. And this is the dude that my colleagues and I were more familiar with, because every one of us, when we went to med school 15, 20 years ago, were using Dr. Netter's anatomy books. And he is kind of like the Norman Rockwell of medicine. If you guys know Norman Rockwell, one of the greatest American painters. And his work is like on par with Norman Rockwell, except it's all based off of medicine. And Dr. Netter was also a surgeon, extremely talented. And his works were not just like plain old, boring, this is, the temporalis muscle, masseter muscle, etc., like the blood vessels. It also depicted kind of like the real life presentation of certain diseases. So for example, like Graves' disease, as you see over here, exophthalmos, right, severe bulging out of the eyes, right? So he depicts these things in kind of like these more like realistic, artistic type of ways. Man choking, simply put. Makes him cyanotic and blue when he chokes out. Some more beautiful works. We've got a boxer over here, and like all the different parts of the central nervous system that innervate the different muscles in the body. Just like phenomenal work. This is one of my favorites. Acute alcoholism. Like, you get the facial expression perfect, right? It's like drunk driving. I have no idea why this dude's naked. Just like sitting home, just getting blitzed and developing cirrhosis while he's naked. And then now you have this guy, Gunther von Hagens. This guy is a famous German anatomist and a huge weirdo, but a brilliant weirdo at that. This guy came up with the process of plastination, which is how I have this dead guy's arm that I keep in my office. So for those of you who have never visited me in my office, this sits in my office right in front of me, so whenever I'm eating my lunch, I get to stare at the dead guy's arm. So this is plastination. Effectively, the process is you basically remove all the water within the tissues and replace it with plastics. And so if you were to lift the display case here, there's a little bit of an odor, but it's not terrible. It's not like the smell of formalin or formaldehyde, right? It doesn't have that really like off-putting odor. And this is also displayed at Body Worlds. And Body Worlds has an ongoing exhibit in Las Vegas, but they also do tours around the country and around the world, displaying all these incredible dissections. And some of the dissections are a little bit ethically questionable. He's had to actually get rid of some of his displays because they basically portrayed people in the act of intimate type of relations. And that made a lot of people very upset, and rightfully so. It's like these are two dead people who probably never knew each other in real life, and now you're like having them get at it without skin. Like, it's kind of crazy. But he's definitely raised the ire of a lot of Catholic and Orthodox Jewish groups, right? Because still to this day, it's kind of taboo, even in the Catholic Church, and like the more Orthodox sections of the Catholic Church. are opposed to human dissection, right? Because it kind of violates the sanctity of life. This, again, that's Bartholomew, right? St. Bartholomew with the flayed skin. Exactly the same thing. Right? But instead, it's a real person. That's a real body. And the way that they harvest these bodies is also kind of questionable. These are unclaimed bodies from China. So, why are they unclaimed? I don't know. Did they speak out against the Chinese government? I don't know. So, don't know what's going on here with these bodies, but regardless, they're still gorgeous. I mean, this is the entire nervous system dissected out. Absolutely insane. And there's a catalog. You can actually order these. There's a catalog where you can actually order plastinized dissections. I don't know how much they are. They're probably really expensive. But I was trying to convince my supervisors, hey, we should get some of these. We display them around. And I showed them what I did here, and they were like, nah. It's going to be a little bit too expensive. We don't have the budget for that. So anyways, to conclude, art plays a really important role in science, in medicine. Right? It really allows us to truly understand the way the human body works. And I also want to thank all of my club officers for helping found the Vandyke Carter Club, as well as all of our group members who have been coming in and making beautiful works of art over the past several months. And so you guys are wonderful. So thank you for coming out. I appreciate it. If you're interested in joining the Vandyke Carter Club, feel free to shoot me an email. You can also email us here at our club GCU email as well. Yes?
How much did you end up paying for the
I did not. Actually, before I got hired full-time here, my predecessor, well, he wasn't doctor back then, but now he is. So I can't call him Dr. Bodine. Dr. Bodine acquired this from a place called Arizona Plasticized Arts that used to be based out of Tucson, Arizona. I looked them up to see if they were still around because I was interested in buying more of these. And they had since closed down. I guess there's really not much of a market for plasticized body parts. But I imagine it was quite expensive. And it was sitting in a cardboard box in the lab, right here, right down the hall, on top of a locker, and it was collecting dead gnats. Like, nobody was doing anything with it. And so before I got hired full-time, I asked my boss, I was like, so, can I have that plasticized arm, please? And he's like, yeah, I guess so. And so I had a student, I hired a student to build a display case, and then my colleague, Dr. Jackson, helped me with the lighting, so it's got cool lighting. And I forgot to bring the clicker. I can change it so it makes these crazy patterns of lights and stuff. But anyways, Sandy?
Yeah.
Yeah? All right. Excellent.